racing driver in the past 50 years. He always tells the girls and fellas that nobody appreciates and respects careful driving more than a professional racer. Well, sure, all that safety stuff was fine, I told him. Sounded good. But speed was my meat. A good fast mill and a tire-burning takeoff. The nights go for speed too, Walt said. And then he asked if I'd like to bring my job out to the drag strip Sunday and try it out against some of their wagons. This was what I'd been waiting for. Walt had himself a deal. But I never got near the strip. They wouldn't let me. They checked my car over and said it wasn't safe. It took me a month working after school and on weekends just to get ready to pass the safety test. So I was finally going to get my chance. While we were waiting for them to qualify my car, Walt showed me around, explaining how a properly run drag strip operates. There are classifications for all kinds of hot rods, but the main one is the ratio of weight to piston displacement. This determines the basic engine class. After a car is weighed and classified, it gets a complete safety inspection. I knew from experience how tough this is. Those inspectors don't miss a thing. That's why drag strips have run for years without a serious accident. When it's been classified and inspected for safety, a car is ready to run. It gets an official number. But drivers have to be in good standing, too. If they're not of age, their parents have to okay them. Some of them show up a little too early. While the other cars are getting oil changes, he just gets changes, period. One of the cars, named the Bean Bandit, held a strip record from a standing start to 142 miles an hour in a quarter of a mile. You'd be surprised at the number of girls who enter these drags. Not just driving, either. They know what's under the hood because they put it there themselves. Yeah, the drag strip was like a circus or a miniature Indianapolis. Hundreds of people were there from town to watch. A real big professional deal. Believe it or not, from a standing start, some of these draggers would beat a jet plane down that quarter-mile stretch. There were just about as many ideas in rebuilt bodies and chassis as there were in high-efficiency motors. It may be a man's world, but you'd never know it on that drag strip. The girls didn't ask any special deal either. They went right out and ran against the men. Did fine, too. They won their share of places. George Hanks and Jim Daniels had a right to be proud. And they were. The nights in their drag strip were things the whole city could take pride in. No wonder they came out by the hundreds or even thousands to watch every drag meet. Then Walt pointed out a man at the refreshment counter. His name was Phillips, a top designing engineer from Detroit. Did you know that a whole lot of the engine ideas in new cars were first tested and proved on drag strips and dry lakes? Things like dual exhaust, dual carburetors, and high compression heads. Phillips was there to watch for applications his company could use. You know, by the time they called my number, I'd become so interested I almost forgot what I was there for. This was my chance to show him. I didn't have any doubt about breaking the record. The only question I had was, by how much? But either that clock was broken or somebody was being funny, I thought. They had me clocked at a little over 70, just half the speed of the top car. I complained to Walt just who the comic was. Walt said nobody, the time was right. But if I wanted to try a drag race, I sure did. Now I could really show 'em. Right on the drag strip with no phony clocks. Out of my way, starter. Yeah, I showed 'em all right. I had the coldest hot rod on the strip. I was left so far back I could have been driving Jack Benny's Maxwell. Obviously, I had a lot to learn from these squares. Well, there was still the reliability run. You'd think by now I'd have had better sense than to go through with it, but I didn't. And I learned another lesson. I couldn't even finish. My radiator boiled over and I ran out of gas. And I was going to teach them about hot rods. When that 1925 Star went by me, that did it. Right then, I made up my mind. If it was the last thing I ever did, I had to be one of the Knights. So I got the list of membership requirements from Walton, his sister. She was the club secretary. And guess the first thing I had to do? I had to learn to drive. Imagine that, after all the miles I'd driven. But after a couple of sessions in the dual-control car, I found out there was a whole lot more to good, safe driving than knowing how to turn the wheel or which pedal is the gas. Actually, there was more I didn't know about driving than I did know. But that was just the first requirement. Next thing on the list was to go 6 months without a citation, or even a warning. That was really tough at first, but I made it. Believe me, I was never so glad of anything in my life as I was to get hold of that little Knight's membership card. But I knew one thing. I was a whole lot better and a safer driver than I was before I started working for it. Janet asked me to come outside. She said the Knights were holding a clinic and wanted me to join them. And that's when I found out how little I actually did know about souping up an engine. The Knights were holding a clinic, all right, on my car. I thought I'd revved up my motor pretty well. But now I learned about porting and relieving the block, cylinder bore, racing flywheels, custom camshafts, exhaust headers, dual exhaust, tolerances, new ignition, high compression heads, hemispherical combustion chambers, dual carbs, dual point distributors, dual intake. Well, I needed a mechanic's dictionary to even follow what they were talking about. All those parts and the tools were going to cost money, so I got a job after school and Saturdays to pay for them. You know, some guys spend thousands of dollars on a good hot rod, plus thousands of hours of work. They won't even drive him in traffic. Some careless driver might smash into him and ruin a car that costs more than a Cadillac. While I was getting the money together, I read every book on mechanics I could get. I got a few ideas, too, about carburetors mostly. I decided to rebuild my car for the reliability run instead of the drag race. This would give me a better chance to try my carburetor ideas. And you know something? My ideas paid off, too. It took me a few months, but I finally won a 3rd place for reliability. But I got a real surprise when they started giving out the trophies. How? Well, the city merchants had awarded a trip to the Memorial Day race at Indianapolis to the boy. The club voted most deserving. And guess who the Knights elected? Me, Bill Bowers, the ex-ticket champ. How about that? Then Mr. Phillips, you know, the Detroit engineer, came over and wanted to look at my carburetor. He asked if I'd be interested in a scholarship for their factory school to study mechanical engineering. They've given a lot of scholarships to fellas in hot rod clubs, and a lot of them became top mechanics and designers. Of course, I said yes. So I got the biggest kick of my life, seeing the 500-mile race. They'd arranged for Ralph De Palma to show me around, too. He introduced me to racing stars like Matty Ayula and Ab Jenkins. And Mr. De Palma and Harry Hartz talked over old times. We looked over all the cars, too. Bob Estes and driver Don Freeland were wheeling their special out for a warm-up run. This is the toughest race of all, for cars and drivers. A speed trial and reliability run all at once. What a kick, meeting famous guys like Duke Neyland and Roger Ward. And they told me they all considered Ralph De Palma the greatest driver in Indianapolis history. And Wilbur Shaw, the president of the Indianapolis Speedway, agreed with him. He won the race 3 times himself. You think the races are fast? You should watch the pit crews work. Why, they can change a tire faster than a blowout can go flat. A driver just couldn't win the race without a good pit crew to work his car over during the pit stops. Then, on the morning of Memorial Day, the big race started. I think there were about 200,000 people watching. The biggest crowd for any sports event in the country. And get this, out of the 33 cars, 9 of them were driven by ex-hot rodders, members of clubs like the Knights. The winner drove the 500 miles in less than 4 hours. That means an average of better than 125. Yeah, like I said, it was the biggest kick I ever had. Hard to realize I was actually sitting there, watching the biggest race in the world. Yeah, it's tough to believe now that that jerk in the slop-up was me, just a few months back, before I became a knight. You see, the reckless kid and an old clunker like that one is not a hot rodder at all. He's a square and a shot rod. Real hot rodders in organized clubs and timing associations all over the country have taken what used to be a hazard and turned it into a real hobby. And a genuine benefit to their communities. Not just through safe driving and driver education either. They've raised thousands of dollars for charity, conducted blood drives for the Red Cross, and developed top mechanics and designers for automobile manufacturers, as well as testing and proving ideas that have produced better, safer cars for everybody. So that's the real story of the cool hot rod. The one-time hazard that has become a brand new, safe, progressive American hobby.
That kind of tells itself in their faces. Smiling faces. Warm faces. Friendly faces. But on guard. And wondering. Questioning. It is also about a special kind of race. To help promote a better understanding between officer and boy, the police departments of 20 different cities organized the Peace Officers Car Club Association. As our first project, we decided to hold a special kind of race. We called in the famous racing driver Ralph De Palma to help us put the show on the road. As the juvenile officer of our town, I explained the race to our police department. It was going to be a safety and economy run, not a speed race. But it wasn't going to be any cinch either. We had staked out a grueling 2-day, 663-mile route. Starting in the city of Linwood, California, and moving east to San Bernardino. Then north, cutting through the mountains at Cajon Pass to Barstow for refueling. Then out across the Joshua Tree Desert to Las Vegas, Nevada. Up to the Hoover Dam and back home again. Well, whatever doubts I had that the kids would go for this race were dispelled during my meetings with the Capri Car Club, selected to represent our town in the run because of their excellent safety record. Their enthusiasm was wonderful. They were taking the race seriously. They wanted to be sure they had the right driver and observer. As one member put it, this was no race for a character with a hot temper or a heavy foot. And they were choosing in a genuine democratic way. The people's choice turned out to be Dick Owens, observer, and Jim Hummer, driver. Well, it wasn't very long after that before the Capri Car Club emblem went onto the car, and Jim and I went down to the shop. Here, Jim was introduced to the mechanic and looked on as the final adjustments were being made. The last-minute tune-up, the carburetor check, the distributor points, compression, and of course the brakes. Then the dealer turned the key and the car over to Jim and wished him the best of luck. And Jim headed out for the official refueling station to fill up with gas. Gas that was going to play the very important role of a measuring rod in figuring out the winner. As you know, it takes more gas to move a heavy car than a light one. So to make things fair for all the cars participating in the economy run, the ton mileage formula was going to be used. To get ton miles per gallon, you take the weight of your car in tons, multiply that by the number of miles that you travel, and then divide by the gallons of gas that you use. Here, for the first time, I could see how well what we had done in our town had been repeated by police departments in the other cities. And here I got my first good look at the other cars. Funny, as I told you, I'm a juvenile officer, but no matter how long I work with teenage kids, I'm always being surprised by their fantastic imaginations. Take the names of their clubs, the bright, vibrant colors of their cars and jackets. To me, these were all the clue to the spirit with which they were entering this safety and economy run. They brought to it all the fresh and exciting qualities of youth. And when it came to weighing the cars in, you'd be surprised to see how quickly they could become serious. You'd think the cars were made of gold the way they kept tab on the scales. As I looked over the 15 cars that day before the race, I held back my enthusiasm a little. I knew teenage kids were unpredictable. For what appeared no reason at all, they could play havoc with the law. We still had some rough humps to get over before we could say that our approach was right. But we weren't going to keep them in a glass cage. We were going to show them the road, teach them the right way to drive on it, give them all the facts, then give them the wheel, and let them shoulder their own responsibility. Now, we could only wait and see. At 6 o'clock the next morning, there was a light mist. The first car was off on the run, and another car followed it every 2 minutes. By 6:30, the last car was away and the sun was still down. If there had been a question in anyone's mind as to how exciting this race was going to be, he'd have his answers soon. At Cajon Pass, the fog was socked in. Heavy fog and mountain driving, as tough a combination of gas-eating driving conditions as you can get. And the boys had to average a realistic 35 miles an hour for the course in order to come in on time. And they had to conform to all the traffic laws and regulations in the 2 states of California and Nevada, their counties and their towns. The number 1 car, the capital letter Wise Men from Whittier, lay for a long time behind a tanker before the road-wise, courteous truck driver signaled that there was a safe, clear road ahead. Though the weather broke on the Barstow side of the mountain pass, these boys hadn't been out there more than an hour when they all knew that a safety and economy run was a special kind of a race, a mighty tough kind at that. And if you had any doubt as to whether the boys would be getting a real kick out of the run, you could read your answer, as I did, traveling up and down the line of gaily colored cars in the faces of the drivers, like Don Pratt of the Buccaneers or his observer, Roland Ellis from the Falcons, riding beside him. All you had to do was look at the faces behind the wheels. Remember, this is not only a story about officer, boy, and automobile. It's also about the road. These teenage kids were watching it like hawks, doing a job of navigation just like the boy Mark Twain did on the Mississippi River. For the time being, the road was straight and clear. Maximum safety speed, 55 miles per hour. They were moving on to Barstow. The road, like the river, had its branches. They converged at Barstow, and so did the traffic. It thickened, and the cars crawled like flies on sticky paper. You couldn't even get into 3rd gear, and the gas was burning up fast. As Malalka, the driver for the Deciders, put it, that was all part of the game, the nerve test. Imagine getting a thrill at 15 miles an hour, sweating out gas. De Palma, who had thousands of checkered flags waved at him in a period of 50 years of association with racing driving, was now behind the flag himself and loving it, flagging them down, pointing the turn into the refueling station, clocking the kids in. The wide spread between the cars on the road narrowed, and they piled into the station bumper to bumper. I was waiting anxiously for Jim Hummer to come in, and I kind of choked up a little when I saw him make the turn. No sooner had he shut off his motor than I found him coming toward me with a broad grin on his face. The word about the first annual Youth Safety and Economy Run had spread to boys in the car clubs all along the route. Here in Barstow, the local car club boys came out to play host. Their hospitality was terrific. The moment a motor was killed, they hopped on the car and shoved it on into the station, saving every ounce of gas. The official clocker gave each driver his time. The Barstow Car Club boys lined up the cars for the next starting position. Then they all joined us for lunch. A An hour for lunch was only a brief respite for a 2-day haul. Not much time to relax the building tension. But I don't think Jim or I will ever forget that crazy-looking rag doll at Barstow. Soon we were back to the serious business of the race. Again, we were off on the run. Next stop, Las Vegas, Nevada. As we moved through Barstow Bridge, the loud tensions that had gathered in our nerves on the first lap kind of settled down now to a soft, steady hum. And the road, like the river, flowed through beautiful country. The officials whose job it was to patrol the roads, mark the turns, check on possible violations, were members of the Peace Officers Car Club. Their faces were smiling too, beginning to feel mighty proud of their first project. No trouble so far, not a single violation yet. And as the road cut through the broad plains, you felt the tremendous space all around you, the country rolling out to the horizon, and you rolling with it. It was beautiful, and you sort of sensed the real meaning behind the word freedom. The road, like river water, was running under you, and all the time you kept thinking, what a strange run this was, where speed was the temptress. You could see her in your mind's eye, a siren coaxing you to open the throttle, burn up the road. Actually, the landscape changes gradually, yet something new always seems to come upon you suddenly, like the stubborn, needle-pointed Joshua trees fighting the heat of the desert. All of a sudden, they were there. And they weren't the only ones fighting the heat. The boys were too, and they fought it all the way into Vegas. Now it was time to give their dry-throated selves and their low gas tanks a long drink. Then, off again to Boulder Dam. As they came into the station, some of the boys were talking about the dam, the hydroelectric setup, how it powered this part of the country. Frankly, they knew more about it than I did. And I realized there were many more valuable things happening on this run than even we had bargained for. It became a kind of educational adventure, stimulated the searching minds of these kids. And they were looking forward anxiously to seeing the giant dam, one of the genuinely great achievements of man. It took a lot of driving finesse to get away smooth without wasting gas. A stoplight was like a dragon. You had to move by it on cat's feet. And the password was, slow and easy, Jack. No showman could have designed the approach to the dam any better for suspense. It was terrific.